The desert stretched endlessly before Khedive Ismail as he stood beneath the merciless Egyptian sun in 1854. Behind him lay the ancient land of pharaohs. Ahead, a dream that would transform his kingdom into the crossroads of the modern world. Egypt occupied the most coveted piece of real estate on Earth. Ships traveling between Europe and Asia had sailed around the entire African continent for centuries, adding months to their journeys. Fortunes waited for anyone who could carve a shortcut through this narrow strip of sand separating the Mediterranean from the Red Sea. Enter Ferdinand de Lesseps, a French diplomat with charm, connections, and an audacious proposal. He had befriended the Egyptian royal family years earlier during his posting in Cairo. Now he returned with architectural plans that seemed torn from science fiction. Cut a canal straight through 100 miles of desert, connect two seas, reshape global commerce forever. The numbers dazzled the young Khedive. Thousands of ships would pay tolls to use Egyptian waters. Trade revenues would pour into Cairo's treasury. European powers would court Egypt's friendship. The Ottoman masters in Constantinople would finally respect their ambitious province. De Lesseps painted visions of a new Alexandria rising along the canal banks. Steam-powered excavators would move mountains of sand. Modern engineering would accomplish what the ancients never dared attempt. Egypt would leap from medieval backwardness into the industrial age within a single generation. Ismail signed the concession agreement without fully reading the terms. The canal company would remain primarily French-owned. Egypt would provide the land, the labor, and much of the initial capital. Profits would be split, but operating control stayed in European hands. None of these details troubled the Khedive. He saw only glory ahead. His name would echo through history alongside the great pyramid builders. Foreign newspapers would praise Egyptian progress. The canal would prove that his people could match any Western achievement. The trap had been set. Egypt just didn't know it yet. On April 25, 1859, the first ceremonial shovel broke ground at Port Said. De Lesseps declared the project would take 6 years and cost 200 million francs. He was wrong on both counts. The initial plan relied on muscle and bone. Egyptian peasants arrived by the tens of thousands, conscripted from their farms under the traditional corvée labor system. They received minimal pay and even less regard for their lives. Armed overseers drove them into the desert with crude tools, expecting human sweat to move what machines could barely budge. The canal demanded a trench 26 feet deep and wide enough for 2 ships to pass. Workers hauled away sand in wicker baskets balanced on their heads. Summer temperatures exceeded 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Water supplies ran dangerously low. Disease spread through the labor camps like wildfire. Cholera killed thousands in the first 2 years alone. Dysentery claimed thousands more. Exhaustion, heat stroke, and industrial accidents added to the death toll. Egypt never published official casualty figures, but conservative estimates put the number at 120,000 dead. Some historians suggest the true count reached twice that. International outrage eventually forced changes. Britain pressured the Ottoman Sultan to ban forced labor in 1863. The canal company had no choice but to mechanize. Massive dredging machines arrived from Europe powered by coal-fired steam engines. These iron beasts accomplished in days what thousands of men struggled to complete in months. But mechanization brought new costs. Egypt had already spent far beyond the original budget. The modernized equipment required even more capital. French banks extended loans at interest rates that would make a loan shark blush. Khedive Ismail signed every agreement placed before him, convinced the canal's eventual profits would cover all debts. By 1866, the project had consumed twice its projected budget. Workers had removed 75 million cubic meters of earth. The finish line finally appeared on the horizon. Egypt had spent nearly a decade and sacrificed a generation of its sons. The Mediterranean and Red Sea would soon meet. The question nobody asked was simple: at what true cost? November 17, 1869. Khedive Ismail threw the most extravagant party the world had seen since the Roman Empire. 6,000 guests received gilded invitations to witness history. Empress Eugénie of France arrived on the imperial yacht. The Emperor of Austria sent his brother. Crown princes, ambassadors, and industrial magnates descended on Egypt from every corner of the globe. Ismail intended to prove that his kingdom belonged among the civilized powers of Europe. The celebration began days before the actual opening. Cairo transformed into a glittering showpiece of modernity. New boulevards lined with gas lamps cut through ancient neighborhoods. A brand new opera house rose in the European district, built specifically for the occasion. Ismail commissioned Giuseppe Verdi to compose an opera celebrating Egyptian glory. Though Aida wouldn't premiere until 2 years later, the intention revealed everything about the Khedive's ambitions. The flotilla procession through the canal stretched for miles. 68 ships followed Empress Eugenie's vessel L'Aigle in a stately parade from Port Said to Suez. Crowds lined the banks, watching the impossible become real. Water from two seas mingled for the first time in geological history. Cannons fired salutes, bands played anthems, champagne flowed like the Nile during flood season. Ismail spared no expense on entertainment. Fireworks illuminated the desert sky each night. Elaborate banquets featured delicacies imported from Paris. Dancers, musicians, and performers competed for attention. The Khedive hosted balls in palaces hastily constructed just for the festivities. European newspapers declared it the social event of the century. The celebration lasted 3 weeks and cost over £2 million. That figure represented nearly a third of Egypt's annual revenue. Ismail didn't care. He walked among European royalty as an equal. Foreign journalists praised Egyptian sophistication. The canal stood as proof that his vision had succeeded. But while Cairo celebrated, bankers in London and Paris tallied different numbers. Egypt's total debt now exceeded £100 million. Annual interest payments consumed more than half the government's income. The canal company remained primarily foreign-owned, with profits flowing to European shareholders. The party ended, the bills came due, and Khedive Ismail finally began to understand the bargain he had made. The 1870s brought financial reality crashing down on Cairo. Egypt's debt spiral had become unsustainable. The canal generated substantial toll revenues, but most profits enriched European shareholders. Egyptian coffers saw only a fraction of the wealth passing through their own territory. Khedive Ismail raised taxes on farmers already struggling with poverty. He cut government salaries and canceled public works projects. Nothing helped. European creditors demanded payment in gold, not excuses. Interest rates climbed higher with each renegotiation. The debt trap had snapped shut. By 1875, Ismail faced catastrophe. He owed £94 million to foreign banks. Egypt's entire annual revenue couldn't cover the interest payments. Creditors circled like vultures, threatening to seize Egyptian assets if payment didn't arrive. The Khedive had one card left to play. On a desperate November evening, Ismail summoned his financial advisors. Egypt owned 176,602 shares in the Suez Canal Company, representing 44% ownership. These shares were the crown jewels of the kingdom, the tangible proof that Egyptian sacrifice had built something extraordinary. Selling them would be national humiliation. Keeping them meant bankruptcy. Ismail chose survival over pride. He instructed his agents to quietly offer the shares to French investors. The French hesitated, sensing desperation, hoping the price would drop further. British Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli heard about the opportunity through intelligence channels. He recognized the strategic implications immediately. Control of Suez meant control of the fastest route to India, the jewel of the British Empire. He had to act before France changed its mind. The British Parliament wasn't in session. Disraeli couldn't seek formal approval. He borrowed £4 million from the Rothschild banking family on his personal authority and purchased Egypt's entire stake within 24 hours. The transaction shocked diplomatic circles across Europe. Egypt received immediate cash but lost something far more valuable. The British government now owned the largest single stake in the canal. Ismail had sold his kingdom's future to solve today's crisis. The financial bleeding didn't stop. Within a year, Egypt defaulted on other loans. European creditors demanded action. Britain and France established the dual control in 1876, placing English and French officials directly in charge of Egyptian finances. Every government expenditure required foreign approval. Tax collection fell under European supervision. Khedive Ismail still wore his crown and lived in his palace, but he no longer ruled his own country. Foreign bureaucrats made the real decisions. Egyptian ministers became administrators following orders from London and Paris. The canal had cost Egypt its independence. The kingdom had gambled everything on a dream of modernization and lost. Khedive Ismail became a prisoner in his own palace. British and French controllers vetoed his decisions, blocked his appointments, and redirected tax revenues to European creditors. The humiliation proved too much for the European powers as well. If the Khedive couldn't be controlled, he could be replaced. In June 1879, Britain and France pressured the Ottoman Sultan to depose Ismail. His son Tewfik took the throne, a weaker man more willing to accept foreign domination. Egypt had a new ruler, but the same foreign masters. Egyptian army officers watched their country's degradation with growing fury. Colonel Ahmed Urabi emerged as their voice. He came from peasant stock, rare among the Ottoman-descended elite who traditionally commanded Egyptian forces. His men loved him. The people saw him as their champion. Urabi's message rang simple and powerful. Egypt for the Egyptians. He demanded an end to foreign interference and the dismissal of European controllers. His movement gained momentum through 1881, drawing support from merchants, religious leaders, and common farmers. Tewfik tried to suppress the rebellion but discovered his own army wouldn't follow orders against Urabi. By early 1882, Urabi effectively controlled Egypt. Tewfik remained Khedive in name only. Britain faced an intolerable situation. A nationalist government in Cairo might threaten canal operations or, worse, inspire similar movements across the empire. Anti-foreign riots in Alexandria that June provided the excuse. British newspapers published exaggerated accounts of European casualties. The Royal Navy bombarded Alexandria's fortifications in July. 10,000 British troops landed in August. The military campaign lasted 6 weeks. British forces crushed Urabi's army at the Battle of Tel el-Kebir on September 13th. Urabi surrendered and faced exile to Ceylon. Tewfik returned to his palace, grateful and completely subservient. Britain declared Egypt a protectorate. British advisors embedded themselves in every government ministry. A British agent and consul general became the true power in Cairo. The occupation would officially be temporary, lasting only until order was restored. That temporary occupation endured 70 years. The canal that promised to make Egypt great had instead delivered the kingdom into foreign hands. Ismail's dream of modernization had become a nightmare of colonization. The Suez Canal became exactly what its builders promised. Ships cut their journey time between Europe and Asia by thousands of miles. Global trade exploded. The canal processed over 3,000 vessels in its first full year of operation. By 1900, that number had tripled. But Egypt watched this success from the sidelines. British administrators collected the tolls. European shipping companies reaped the savings. The Suez Canal Company paid dividends to shareholders in London and Paris. Egyptian workers maintained the waterway their grandfathers had died building, receiving wages that barely covered bread. The British transformed Egypt into a convenient base for imperial operations. They built military installations along the canal zone. Railway networks connected Suez to British possessions across Africa and Asia. Cotton plantations expanded to feed Manchester textile mills while Egyptian farmers grew poorer. Generations of Egyptians grew up under foreign occupation. Their grandfathers had sacrificed everything for modernization. The reward was 70 years of colonialism. Schools taught British history. Courts applied British law. Egyptian ministers signed documents drafted in London. The question haunted intellectuals and revolutionaries alike. Had progress been worth the price? Egypt possessed one of the world's most valuable strategic assets, yet remained powerless in its own land. The canal connected continents but had severed Egypt from its own destiny. July 26, 1956. President Gamal Abdel Nasser stood before a massive crowd in Alexandria and spoke the code word that changed everything, de Lesseps. Egyptian forces immediately seized control of the canal. Nasser's voice thundered through loudspeakers across the nation. "The Suez Canal belongs to Egypt. We will operate it ourselves. We will collect the revenues ourselves." Britain and France responded with military force joined by Israel. The Suez Crisis of 1956 brought the world to the brink of war. But times had changed. The United States and Soviet Union both opposed the invasion. International pressure forced the attackers to withdraw. Egypt had finally reclaimed what it lost a century before. The canal that cost a kingdom had returned to Egyptian hands. Today, massive container ships pass through waters that once ran red with Egyptian blood. annual revenues exceed $5 billion, funding schools, hospitals, and infrastructure across the nation. Khedive Ismail's vision had been correct. The Suez Canal did make Egypt strategically vital and economically powerful. He just didn't live to see it. Sometimes the dreams of one generation require the sacrifices of 3 more to become reality. The canal still connects 2 seas, but it took Egypt 102 years to reconnect with its own sovereignty.